Yeah. I'm Andrew Pilaj, Java developer in the engineering team at Payara, one of the primary leads of one of the little sub-teams that pushes development on Payara Server specifically. With me is Matt Gill, who can introduce himself. While he does that, I'll start sharing my screen.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt. So I'm another one of the team leaders for another one of the projects which we'll be going into shortly. Yeah.
Now, can I remember how to? I can never ever remember how to do this. There we go. Can you see that? Which way? Oh wait, how does that look for people?
That's displaying the wrong way. No, that's your view.
I hate PowerPoint. Why? Oh Lord, I'm pushing all the wrong buttons. What has happened? Right. We'll just go like this.
You just double click for full screen, it might work. Or whatever the full screen button is.
Nope, it's blocking full screen.
No worries.
We'll just do it like this. Right, so yep, again, I'm Andrew, Java developer, that's Matt. These are pictures from us from Madeira. So first up that we're going to discuss is the hot talk of the town, of the community enterprise split. So this comes with a number of changes. It's part of our kind of efforts to make things a bit simpler, because a lot of people found the feature and stability streams a bit confusing, and all our support offerings confusing. This is now just, there's the community version and the enterprise version, but it's more than just that. So first off, something that's getting a lot of noise is the new release cadences. So community is no longer just going to be a fixed quarterly release. It's going to hopefully be a roughly monthly release. It's not strictly a monthly release. It's essentially we release when it's got features in it, which we aim to have monthly, but it's not necessarily monthly. Enterprise, though, is a monthly release because that will always include some sort of bug fixes or that to that effect. So as I said, the feature and stability streams have just become Payara Enterprise. This is, I just realized I'll make it a bit bigger so people see. Feature and stability streams have become Payara Enterprise. So rather than the feature stream essentially being a couple of patches on top of the quarterly community releases, and stability streams just being continual patches on the first release of the year, it's best of both worlds, essentially, or that's how we like to see it, rather than only syncing features once every quarter, we sync the features when they're ready. And we're keeping the monthly bug fixes as part of that comes from the stability and feature streams as well. So a bit of a merge of the two rather than just dropping one. This also brings with it some distinct focuses. So this is referring to specifically that the enterprise is its own product now. It's no longer just a maintained version of community. So this actually translates to the two products having different focuses. They're targeting different audiences now. So community is more focused bleeding edge and developers. So it's more likely to bring in the breaking changes. So bringing in the refactors and other things which can potentially be a bit dangerous to just literally go thump and dump straight into production environments. Those are more likely to actually just dump straight into community. with testing. Obviously, we're not just going to suddenly upend everything. And enterprise is more focused at, well, enterprise. So production systems, so everything getting, being more automated and integrated rather than being more manual in the sense of development. So something as well, if you've been looking at the release numbers as well, we've got new versioning. So previously the versioning system was based on the short, I don't know the exact term, but short year. So the last two numbers of the year. So if it was 2019, you'd have 19, and then the quarter. So 191, 192, up to 194, and then cycling over to 201 to the 2020 first quarter. This is, again, also, as I said, a load of people found this particularly confusing, particularly when you start getting the patches on top of that. So you got 201.1, etc. We are now doing just full year, so 2020 for community anyway. It's now full year 2020, and then although it is a .1, .2, .3, in my mind it's more 2020 R1, so release number 1, release number 2 in that sense. Enterprise though has different versioning to actually differentiate it. As I said, they're now different products. Enterprise is no longer just a maintained version of Payara Community. So that is now based on the, it's semantic versioning, but it starts at 21. No, I was right first time, 20. So that will now just go 5, 20, 21, 22, 23, with potentially incremental patches in between if there's no features or anything, if it is just a bug fix release. So 20.1. Did you have anything to mention on that, Matt? Have I missed anything?
Only on the as we've talked about, support and kind of stability, but also on kind of composition over aggregation across the projects. Do you want me to mention that?
Yes, please go for it.
Sure. So with the enterprise version, the plan is for it to be an out-of-the-box product. So similar to what you've seen with the production domain, the idea is for everything to basically be ready to go with a new version, and also to be able to be backwards compatible. So you should constantly be able to upgrade to the new version with no kind of issues. It should be ready to run, simple upgrades. Community is going to focus more on having kind of cutting edge compatibility and testing out new features. So when you think back to things like the big rewrite of request tracing in lieu of MicroProfile trace open tracing, you're more likely to get that put into community first, where we've gone, it might be a bit more of a difficult and less straightforward upgrade path, but you're going to get the latest compatibility, so you're going to get the latest features that way. Also with new features being integrated into Payara. In enterprise, you're likely to find it integrated straight out of the box, like with the new certificate management, whereas in community, you're more likely to get it as a module that you can plug in yourself. The idea is that is to keep community kind of lean. It's more aimed at development and adoption. And then enterprise is obviously designed to be all run easily. So you might find that there's a bit more setup with community, but you're going to be constantly getting the latest and greatest. I hope that kind of clears things up a little bit.
Yep. Right. Next slide. Okay. Right. So first in for actual things brought in from this release, aside from splittings of products, is MicroProfile 3.3. So although MicroProfile 4.0 is kind of in a bit of a limbo at the moment, 3.3 went ahead fine a few months ago now, so we've brought that in. So this brings with it, it's actually quite a big one in comparison to previous point releases. So you've got config 1.4, config, sorry, I'll just shut my window because it's blowing my curtains into my face. Config 1.4's got a update, which brings with it some extra built-in conversions for the primitives of byte, short, and character, char, but also the actual object versions of those, so the capital byte, capital short, capital char. Of particular note, though, is alongside that is that there's been a change in priority for the automatic converters. So this is referring to the converters you typically got from things like dot value, of those kind of things. The actual priority of those has changed now. So that's something to be particularly wary of if you were banking on that from previous releases. That is now different. For fault tolerance 2.1, there's some extra attributes for fallback and circuit breaker, essentially whitelists and blacklists. These were present on some of the other attributes. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they're very similarly named, either apply on, skip on, or essentially, as I say, whitelists and blacklists of what to actually do. Retry had one. That was it. That was the one I was thinking of. But also now the request scope context has now been specified that does get activated for the asynchronous thread, for the threads that you get kicked off via the asynchronous annotation. So that is now properly defined and it should activate. Health 2.2 got a very small update of essentially it's now CDI 2.0 rather than whatever version of 1 it was, 1.2 I think. Metrics has got an extra metric, that's the word, of simple timer. This is essentially, it's exactly the same as the timer one, but it's got, it's a more cut down version of it. It's got some of the, it doesn't have some of these, the metadata as it is intended to literally be there as a simple timer of just the timer rather than the extra stuff you got with the original one. The annotation for that is not simple timer. I believe it is simply timed or something to that effect. I'd have to look it up again. And then finally, REST client 1.4. Again, essentially quite a small one of, it now has an at target annotation so that it can be qualified with the default CDI or the with the traditional CDI qualifiers of method, type, parameter, not parameter. Oh no, yeah, parameter, attribute, those ones. And that's it for MicroProfile 3.3. There was also a clarification around whether something is what was it again? Can't remember it off the top of my head, but there was a clarification over whether something was optional or not as well. And it has now been clarified that that is optional. Pass this over to Matt now.
Cool. Okay. So there were some, you'll notice quite a lot of these changes have been related to performance. So firstly, on that note, to do with MicroProfile, it was noticed that when using, when other MicroProfile specs were using config API, there was no form of caching whatsoever. So if you think of, so things like metrics, which would constantly refer to config sources whenever you were using or logging a metric, which would then have to count through every single config source you had. If you then think about like fault tolerance methods, you could then be looking at potentially, 40, 60, 80 different references and scans through the MicroProfile config API, which was having a significant hit on performance. So with this release, it's been, we've added a cache to the MicroProfile config properties. So you should see a significant performance step up when using other MicroProfile specs there. There's also been a new MicroProfile config source. So this was requested mainly in the context of cloud services. This config source is called the Payara expression MicroProfile config source. And it uses a syntax like that at the bottom. So it lets you refer to any of the Payara sources which are written in our docs. That's environment variables, system properties, password aliases, that sort of stuff, and lets you combine those. So that's particularly useful when using it in things like cloud, where you've got different environment variables for the host and the port, and you want to combine that into one URL, for example. So that was highly requested and is quite a cool new feature. That's basically it for this page. So if we can skip on to the next one. Cool. So this is relating to micro, especially in Docker. We noticed that Hazelcast was essentially being started up twice in 2 different phases of the micro startup, which again was a significant hit on the startup time of micro. So that's been reduced to only once, so you should notice a significant performance upgrade there. Also in compatibility, when using JSF and JSP in Payara Micro, there was quite a few issues, such as when it was being started in a particular way, JSF just wouldn't be started at all, so apps wouldn't work in that way. Also, the Docker images of Micro didn't support JSP, so that's mostly all been fixed now. So JSF and JSP is a lot easier to use in Micro, especially in Docker. And that's it for that.
Right. So this is, as was mentioned way back at the start, one of the first features that is coming as part of this enterprise community split of this feature of integrated certificate management isn't bundled in by default with Payara community. It is, however, bundled in by default with enterprise. As was pointed out as well, this does not mean it's not available or it doesn't work in community. It just means you need to build and drop it in yourself at the moment. It is a plugin in that aspect. So this is, so what actually is it? It's a set of commands for managing the key and trust stores used by all the different Payara server instances and the HTTP and IOP listeners. So this is the either the synced key store or the custom key stores that you set. So rather than having to use key tool and digging around trying to find the paths to all of your instances, to all the instance key stores and trust stores, you can just, it figures that out for you now. So you just say for instance 1 or instance wibbles, whatever you call your instances, add this certificate and it will figure out where the actual key store or trust store for that is and add it or remove it. But it's more than just adding, removing. It's also generating a self-signed certificate now. So as a quick way to get started, if you don't want to use the default S1AS or Glassfish instance ones, you can just generate your own certificate with providing some subject to alternative names and a full subject, CN and country code, all those things. And though that command automatically just generates it and dumps it into the key and trust store of your target instance. So you don't have to generate it, then add it yourself. It does it all in one action. Along with that as well, though, we've made a command to generate a CSR from that. So with the intended, essentially the intended use case is you generate a self-signed certificate, you then generate a CSR for that certificate or for another certificate that you've already got. Send that to your certificate authority to get signed and then add it back in. So that's there as well. And finally, there's also, to supplement these, we added a command to reload the HTTP listeners, as if you just change the certificate that a HTTP listener is meant to be using after it's already been initialized, it wouldn't pick it up. So now, rather than having to manually restart the server or turn off the listener and restart it again, there's now just a command to just reload them in one action. And that is that for features, unless Matt wants to mention anything else. There are obviously there's more to the release than that. There's a number of bug fixes and other little features that's been brought in. These are just the headline features, as it was. Did you have anything else to add, Matt?
I don't believe so, no.
Brilliant. If there's any questions that attendees have, we've got a little bit of time to answer those.
I saw some things in the chat, but I couldn't see them because I was in sharing screen.
Someone was just talking about the improvement to the startup to Payara Micro that you mentioned, Matt.
If I stop sharing, I should be able to see them. There we go. We can expect improvement in the start of Payara Server and Payara Micro. From that point of view of, with respect to that point particularly, that specifically, that is only in Payara Micro, of essentially to, I believe it was to write some, to make some of the config changes at the time. It was essentially booting, making the changes, and then rebooting to make to have those changes take effect. We've now managed to just get that done in one action. So rather than booting, changing, then rebooting to apply, it can just do it in one step. That was only for Micro though. Server does that, it did that already essentially.
And then there was another comment as well about which areas are the improvements in Java server faces.
I can answer that one. That was that's in the startup of it. So when Payara Micro was being started up, I think it was specifically with the root dir launcher, the JSF faces context wouldn't be initialized, so your JSF stuff wouldn't work. And in the Docker image for Payara Micro, it didn't previously support JSP files at all, whereas now it does.
Cool. Cool.